700%. That's how much the price of energy has spiked across Europe. It's why small businesses across the UK are going bankrupt. And it's why there are millions of Europeans facing the threat of freezing to death in their homes this winter. It all comes down to one thing: oil. Here's the crazy thing about the price of oil. Industry experts have been predicting a crisis for years, and the warnings are now coming true. But the reasons for this crisis are bigger than taxes, Joe Biden, oil cartels, or Vladimir Putin. This cake started baking in 1974, and the icing was put on in 2020 when the world economy hit the equivalent of a brick wall, 60 miles an hour. Now the elites are trying to get it going again, but all of the toxic instability that was built up in the system has started leaking out. It's making a huge mess. Nowhere is that more noticeable than the energy industry. Let's get it. Welcome to BitBoy Crypto. My name is Ben, and in this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the energy crisis that's looming over the entire world. Now make sure to go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button if you want more of these highly educational videos. So the price of oil is tied to an industry that's 160 years in the making and is linked to the global reserve currency, the US dollar. It's an industry that is simultaneously the lifeblood of the world economy and the scorn of the planet. You've seen the climate change graphs and figures 1,000 times by now, so let's get to the important part. We won't get to a sustainable and diverse energy future without oil, a lot more oil. Oil is the bridge that's going to get the world into a better power grid. If we didn't have oil, the world would be using the next cheapest thing, which is coal. And coal, of course, is the dirtiest fuel source outside of burning wood. But Ben, why can't we just switch over to electric cars and wind and solar ASAP? And then all of this will go away. We need the green energy grid. Greening the grid, on the timelines we've been told, it's not possible. In fact, it reminds me of that part in Space Jam when Michael Jordan was in the air and all the Monstars were pulling him down. But he's able to stretch his arm, like a cartoon, to make it to the basket and to win the game. That's what we need to get to a green grid. A magical cartoon ability to defy the laws of physics. Let's assume we want to increase the amount of solar we're using in the United States. Great. Well, what does that actually mean? It means we need more solar panels. Where do solar panels come from? Well, over 90% of them come from one place: China. Also, there are a lot of minerals that go into creating solar panels: cobalt, copper, nickel, crystalline silicon, gallium, silver, several other materials. And those minerals need to be mined.
They're rocks, Hank.
No, they're minerals. Jesus, Maria.
Mined with trucks and power shovels and drills. Those things run on oil. And then those things need to be refined and then assembled, sometimes by slaves, and shipped around the world on diesel freighters so they can be installed on top of an Olive Garden in Burbank so the riders on the Warner Brothers lot feel good about themselves. All in all, the global mining industry would have to grow by a staggering 1,000% overnight to meet the demand for solar panels in the year 2035. Do you see how the math isn't working out? Solar may be an option in the future, but it's not an option for the foreseeable future. In fact, solar and wind only account for 3.3% of the world's global electricity production. And that's after $5 trillion worth of green spending by world governments over the last 20 years. At that rate, it will take another 100 years or so for solar to make up 10% of the electric grid. This isn't a money problem, it's a physics problem. This isn't going to be a popular statement, but people need to know. Solar and wind are not going to reduce the carbon in the atmosphere. If anything, their massive need for mined materials is adding more carbon than they're offsetting. I know it's a lot to take in. I'll give you and Greta Thunberg a moment to reflect.
How dare you?
Now that you've escaped your Al Gore-induced solar coma, let's get to the problem at hand. That is, expensive gas and what is making that number go up. What we have going on is a regional war that's creating supply chain issues, sky-high prices at the pump, as well as outright shortages in other places. There's an embargo in place by a major oil supplying nation, and a cartel of oil producers and oil companies are making record profits, not to mention inflation running out of control. This situation isn't actually unique to 2022. We've been here before. The oil crisis of 1974 had all these same pieces in play and was the first time that oil was used as an economic weapon. Today, we have a war between Ukraine and Russia that's threatening to become global. 1974, Israel was at war with pretty much everyone in the Middle East. 1974, inflation was running amok, thanks in part to a post-Vietnam War spending spree and Nixon removing the dollar from the gold standard in 1971. Inflation was so bad, newspapers were calling it the Great Inflation. Today, the US and other countries are beating those inflation numbers from the 70s. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, was feeling threatened by the US, talking about going energy independent, and was also not a fan of the US supporting Israel's war effort, so they turned off the taps to their supply of 40% of the world's oil. Cut to 2022, and Russia is a new member of OPEC and the primary natural gas supplier to Europe. But that's pretty much over now. As a few weeks ago, Putin is now selling Russian oil almost exclusively to China and India. History sure does rhyme, doesn't it? These challenges alone would be tough enough to overcome, but the current crisis has more to it because the global economy is dealing with a supply chain problem it's never seen before. The supply chain problem was baked into the economy of just-in-time manufacturing and the Amazon Prime pace of delivery. Everything was being made all at once. Inventory was the enemy, and whatever place made products the cheapest was where you, the business owner, would go to do business. This all worked really well for most of the 2000s, but when ships and trucks stopped moving in 2020, the world was watching as just-in-time manufacturing meant out of stock. The centralization of entire industries in one country, China, meant that the world waited for essentials like masks, pharmaceuticals, respirators, and everything else that was supposed to leave a Chinese port. That brings us back to the oil industry. With all the oil derricks, refineries, trucks, and ships used to move oil around the world sitting idle while they fell into disrepair. So when things started to come back online, the demand rebounded, but the supply did not. Everything had to get fixed, brought up to code, and new COVID protocols had to be put in place before any stepped onto an oil rig. Demand was eating away at supply. But in the upside-down world of the commodities market, the uncertainty was making traders nervous. Eventually, traders assumed the oil would become so hard to move due to the backlog of everything in the world restarting that for a brief moment, oil futures went negative. In April of 2020, I remember watching this live. Oil traders would pay you to take the oil off their hands instead of paying for it to be stored on an expensive flammable material storage lot somewhere. On April 20th, the price for a barrel of oil plummeted below zero to negative $37. This never seen before upset to the oil market was a harbinger of things to come because the global oil market operates on a tight margin. And when I say tight, I mean very tight. Even a small dip in supply under the demand rate will cause a big swing in prices. And because demand has been steadily increasing, it's rare that there is an oversupply situation. The latest oversupply of oil the world saw was back in the shale oil boom of the mid-2010s. Shale oil is oil that is trapped in layers of rock and is collected by means of fracking. And for the longest time, it was known that there were large shale deposits littering the central United States. You see, shale oil is expensive to get out of the ground and isn't financially viable unless oil is over $90 a barrel. But in 2010, oil was showing strong support at around $90, so the oil boom was going on. The US was gaining serious energy dominance in the world, but the OPEC cartel wasn't going to sit by and let their influence be threatened. So they used their tight supply controls to push out the shale oil drillers in Texas and the Dakotas by way of flooding the market and causing an oversupply. The shale companies, who were mostly independent, started playing chicken with OPEC to see who would flinch first. Unlucky for them, the Saudis didn't flinch, and most of the shale drillers couldn't hang with the big boys and went bankrupt. Now the order's been restored and OPEC was back in the driver's seat. It was back to making some of the good old profit, and profit they did. Notice I haven't really been talking about who's in control of the White House. That's because the President of the United States has far less influence on the price of gas than most people think. The price of gas is tied to a lot of factors. One of those factors is the consumer, you and me. But the oil industry is a complex system that runs an essential element of the modern economy. So making that market stable is difficult, if not impossible. It's so complicated that even Mr. Solar himself, Elon Musk, says we need more oil before we go green. And he builds rockets in his spare time when he isn't buying Twitter or making trucks with broken windows. That's how we come to green energy. The idea is that by investing in so-called green energy, we can break the dominance oil has on powering the world. But green infrastructure is all based on unreliable power sources that, in their current state, cannot supply the electricity needed to make the transition. The oil economy has been around for 160 years, and unwinding it is going to take a lot of investment, innovation, and most importantly, time. What the world needs to do is wean off oil, but instead, Central Power sounded alarm bells that we had to move away from oil as fast as possible. The fate of the planet was at stake. That any delay would spell disaster. Almost overnight, government, central banks, and multinational corporations started adopting a new set of standards that would prioritize cutting carbon emissions. Those standards are called ESG, or Environmental, Social, and Governance Standards. The World Economic Forum took this idea and ran with it, so ever since 1998, there's been a concentrated effort to pursue so-called green initiatives and to actively divest from all fossil fuels and nuclear power. We pushed the boat away from the dock, left the paddles behind, and now we're floating towards a really big problem. Green energy has failed, and the proof is all around us. In Germany, retired coal plants are being fired up once again to make up for Russia cutting off the fuel oil to their largest economy in the European Union. Because of the sanctions they've imposed to punish Moscow, they are having to respond to pipelines being shut off by the Russian-owned energy giant Gazprom. So in order to save natural gas for home heating, the German government is turning to coal to bridge the gap because their solar generation won't be able to pick up the load. Someone forgot to tell them that there's less daylight in the wintertime. California has been increasing their demand on the electrical grid for decades. And as recently as 2021, we're making plans to ban natural gas appliances from all new building construction. This comes on the heels of California proposing to ban cars with internal combustion engines by 2035. That's hundreds of gigawatts of increased capacity. California isn't able to generate enough to supply their needs now, let alone in the future. In fact, the PG&E power company sent out a memo to state officials telling them to expect rolling blackouts this year. At the same time, the only nuclear power plant in the state still on schedule to be shut down. That plant provides 8.5% of the power in the state by itself. How many pristine deserts and thousands of acres of farmland is Gavin Newsom going to clear cut to make room for solar panels and wind turbines to make up for that? In South America, hydro plants are running at a fraction of their capacity due to record droughts throughout the region. The world's largest hydropower complex at the Itapu Dam is unable to supply power to Paraguay and its neighbors. It's recording power outputs that are a measly 35% of maximum capacity. In the UK, the massive investment in wind energy that was promising to provide 25% of Britain's electricity needs has literally sat motionless for the better part of 2021 when the winds in the North Sea changed. Without wind, there's no power. So the national grid had to scramble to bring natural gas and even coal power plants back online to bridge the gap. This has caused triple-digit energy price increases in the UK that affects the poor and middle class the most. This is not sustainable. And the pain at the pump isn't just an inconvenience. It's starting to eat away at what's left of the middle class wealth, not to mention those who are struggling just to make ends meet. The ESG scam has put us all into a terrible situation, and it's one that doesn't have an easy way out. But let's talk about solutions. Is there one? Can we have cheap power and be responsible with the planet? Short answer is yes, but it's going to take more than just empty Paris Accords or a plug-in Honda Civic to fix that. Experts agree that solar, wind, and other alternative fuels need more time to mature, and that in the meantime, more oil exploration is necessary to divert the world away from the worst source of pollution, coal, and onto the next best power source, natural gas. But oil infrastructure like refineries take time to build, at least 18 months. That means that pumping gas and heating homes is going to stay expensive for the foreseeable future. But there's some easy wins we can get in the near term, and that comes in the form of nuclear power. There are hundreds of nuclear power stations throughout the world that are sitting dormant and can be brought back up to safe operation within a year or so. With that rejuvenation, they would bring a ton of new jobs, as well as innovation for nuclear power, which hasn't seen significant investment for decades. India knows that nuclear is the future of power and is currently building another 8 nuclear sites that would provide another 31,000 megawatts of power and would eliminate the carbon footprint of over 81 coal-fired plants in the next 4 years. That's real progress for green energy, and it's a precedent that the world is starting to notice. There's no nice way to say it. We are in for a hard landing. Everyone needs to understand that the world order is changing, and because of that, we've entered an age of scarcity. But the way forward is clear, and humans can do a lot when we put our minds to it. Maybe all this scarcity has a silver lining. It's going to focus us to make the world better, make commerce and supply chains more transparent, teach us to be more responsible with the gifts we've been given on this planet. That's all I got. Be blessed. BitBoy out.